Max, a German shepherd scarred by rejection, desperately tried to warn his family about an invisible danger. His barks and scratches were dismissed as stubbornness, while a silent flame consumed the wall of the child's bedroom, turning their home into a deadly trap. Time was running out. Max's frantic barks tore through the night stillness, each one a desperate plea, a guttural warning that vibrated through his powerful chest. His claws scraped against the plaster wall, a rhythmic, harsh sound that offered no relief, only the raw certainty that he was failing. The wall, innocent in its appearance, pulsed with a silent, malevolent heat that only he could perceive, a threat growing with every ignored second. "Max, enough!" A sharp voice cut through the cacophony. Richard, the father of the Miller family, emerged from the living room, his brow furrowed in disapproval. His usually gentle eyes hardened as he saw the German shepherd frantically scratching the hallway wall leading to Lucas's room. "What is this nonsense now? To your bed, right now!" Max took a step back, his tail low, but the focus of his golden eyes remained fixed on the wall, an invisible miasma. A scent of burning that was still imperceptible to human nostrils pricked his own, intensifying his panic. He tried again, a softer bark, almost a whimper, as he pushed his snout against the warm surface, searching for a crack, any sign the humans might see. "Didn't you hear me?" Richard approached, his voice grave. "You're being very naughty today. What's gotten into you, boy?" He reached out to grab Max's collar, but the dog swerved away, letting out a faint growl of frustration that Max knew would be interpreted as aggression. That wall, that silent danger was all that mattered. Suddenly, soft footsteps were heard. Lucas, the youngest son, 7 years old, appeared at the hallway entrance, his small teddy bear clutched against his chest. His sleepy eyes widened slightly at the scene. "Dad, is Max fighting the wall?" Max's heart tightened. Lucas, his boy, that room just behind that wall was becoming a chamber of smoke and heat. The German shepherd barked again, a hoarse, urgent sound, and tried to nudge Lucas away from the hallway, away from the imminent danger. "Max, no!" Richard quickly intervened, pulling his son back and placing himself between the dog and the child. The interpretation was immediate and painful for Max. Aggression. "This is unacceptable. You are not going to scare Lucas." Richard's disappointment was an overwhelming weight, another layer of rejection Max knew so well. He felt the gaze of Sophia, his mother who had joined them, concern in her eyes mixed with growing impatience. "Richard, what's going on? He's never done this before." "I don't know, Sophia. Looks like he woke up on the wrong side of the bed," Richard replied, his voice heavy with exasperation. "Come on, Max, you're going to your doghouse now." Every word was a blow. Max tried to look at Sophia, at Lucas, his eyes pleading for understanding, but all he saw was incomprehension. He couldn't speak. He couldn't point to the heat radiating, to the subtle smell of burning plastic that was beginning to mix with the air in his sensitive nostrils. Richard grabbed him by the collar, and though Max could have resisted, he didn't. A part of him, the one that yearned for acceptance, momentarily yielded. But the other, the protector, screamed in silent desperation as he was dragged out, his eyes fixed on the wall, on Lucas's bedroom door. The invisible flame continued to dance, consuming, and the Miller family, relieved by the apparent resolution of the Max problem, remained dangerously oblivious. The sound of the doghouse door clicking shut sealed Max's fate, for now. Outside, under the moonlight, he could feel the scent of danger growing, the heat of the house increasing, while the silence inside was the lullaby of tragedy. The wooden doghouse door slammed shut with a dull thud, echoing the desolation Max felt. The night's darkness embraced him, but the cold didn't penetrate his dense fur as sharply as the sting of rejection. He was outside, under the vast starry mantle, while the danger he had so desperately tried to expose silently consumed his human's home. The smell of something burning, previously subtle and almost undetectable to human nostrils, now danced in the chilly air, a macabre symphony only he could hear. It was a mix of melting plastic, superheated plaster, and a metallic tang, an unmistakable signature of the invisible enemy. Max scratched at the doghouse wood with force, his claws rasping the surface, a sharp, purposeless sound. He couldn't stay there. Every muscle in his body pleaded for action, for a return to the house, for a chance to protect. The heat emanating from the house's structure was now undeniable to his keen senses. A feverish aura that seemed to pulse in the air, stronger near Lucas's room. The wind, which had previously carried the fresh scent of wet grass, now carried the warm, alarming particles of the incipient fire. Inside, peace was a fragile illusion. Richard, after locking Max away, tried to calm Sophia and Lucas. "He's just agitated, honey. Maybe a little jealous." Richard's voice, though firm, held a tone of weariness. He picked Lucas up, his son nestling his head on his shoulder. Lucas, still sleepy, clutched his teddy bear to his chest. "But he's not mean, Dad. He never pushes me." The doubt in Lucas's voice pierced Max, even through the door. Sophia approached the hallway wall, the same one Max had scratched minutes earlier. Her gaze, however, wasn't on the surface, but on Lucas's closed bedroom door. She felt a gentle warmth in the air, a heat that wasn't the usual coziness of the house. "Strange. It's a bit warm here, isn't it?" She touched the wall with her palm, an instinctive gesture. The surface was warm, almost pleasant, not alarming. "Maybe Lucas's heater is on too high." Richard shrugged, dismissing it. "Or the heat coming from the kitchen. Come on, Mom will put you to bed, son." He passed Lucas into Sophia's arms, who kissed his forehead. The family was settling into routines, each one ignoring the whispers of danger. Outside, Max began to dig frantically around the base of the doghouse, dirt flying with each paw strike. He tried to knock down the door, pushing with his body, but the wood resisted. His barks, previously desperate, now transformed into low, frustrated growls, mixed with howls of anguish. A faint crack came from the house, an almost inaudible sound, but to Max, it was like thunder. He knew what it meant. The fire was growing. Sophia took Lucas to his room. As she tucked him into bed, she noticed a peculiar aroma in the air, something she couldn't quite identify. It was almost metallic, a smell of nothing she knew. She shook her head, attributing it to exhaustion. Lucas's bedside lamp flickered once, briefly, before stabilizing. "There you go, my love. Sleep well." She kissed her son's forehead and left, closing the door softly. Max's heart hammered against his ribs. He could feel the vibration of the fire, the unstable electrical energy pulsing through the ground. The smell of smoke, to him, was now dense and unmistakable, permeating every breath. His eyes widened. A subtle, almost translucent smoke began to leak from a tiny crack under the house's roof, directly above Lucas's room. It was imperceptible to the human eye from a distance, a mirage in the dark, but to Max it was a beacon of doom. He barked again, but this time his bark was different. It wasn't the bark of a disobedient dog, but the primal cry of a wolf alerting its pack, a sound laden with desperation and urgency. He ran to the back door of the house, scratching at it with renewed force, but the noise was muffled by the walls. The night silence, once tranquil, was now an accomplice to the enemy, allowing the fire to spread unnoticed. Lucas's life, and that of the entire Miller family, hung by an increasingly thin thread, while Max, the sole sentinel, was powerless, watching the drama unfold from outside. The house, once a sanctuary of peace, was now an oven about to fully ignite. The translucent smoke, A spectre of doom gained substance high on the house, a silent warning that only Max's keen senses picked up. The German shepherd scratched at the doghouse door with a howl of despair, his claws tearing at the wood, but the sound was muffled, insignificant against the indifference of the sleeping home. Every fiber of his being cried out for action, for a way to break through the barrier of wood and incomprehension. He pushed the door with his body, forcing the structure, but the latch held firm. A deep growl, almost a lament, escaped his throat. He could smell the fire, now more pungent, an electrical muffled aroma that mingled with the night air. The heat radiating from the house was palpable to him, an invisible fever consuming the structure. Inside, in the deceptive tranquility of Lucas's room, the boy tossed in bed, his teddy bear still clutched tight. A soft crack from inside the wall made his eyes open slightly. He dismissed it, thinking it was the wind. The bedside lamp flickered again, more prolonged this time, plunging the room into momentary darkness before relighting. Lucas murmured a sleepy, and closed his eyes. In the living room, Richard and Sophia tried to relax. Richard read a book. Sophia browsed on her tablet. "Don't you think it's a little stuffy in here?" Sophia asked, running a hand over her neck. She adjusted the collar of her blouse. Richard lowered his book. "Stuffy? I don't think so, honey. The air conditioning is on." However, even as he spoke, a strange pang of heat hung in the living room air. It wasn't the cozy warmth of summer, but something denser, almost oppressive, that seemed to emanate from the walls. Max, outside, had given up on the door. His golden eyes, bloodshot, scanned the doghouse. There was a small gap at the back, where the wood met the uneven ground. With renewed fury, he began to dig, dirt flying in dark jets. His paws scraped the hard soil, moving with desperate speed. He wouldn't stop. He couldn't stop. A louder noise echoed in Lucas's room, this time a distinct crackle, like dry wood splitting. Lucas sat up in bed, his eyes wide. The lamp flickered again, and this time it didn't come back on. Total darkness swallowed the room, except for a thin line of light that seemed to come from under the door. But it wasn't light from the hallway. It was a flickering orange glow, faint and menacing. Lucas felt a sudden heat in the room. A heat that wasn't from his blanket. He got out of bed, his bare feet touching the cold floor, and walked to the door. He knelt and looked through the crack. Dark smoke, now undeniably visible, crept from under the door, dense and silent. It was like a mist crawling across the hallway floor. In the living room, the electricity flickered for an instant, plunging the house into momentary darkness. Richard and Sophia gasped. "What was that?" Sophia exclaimed, her voice laden with fear. The lights came back on, but the glow was weaker, almost a premonition. A piercing scream tore through the house's silence, a sharp, terrified sound that came from the hallway. "Dad! Mom! There's smoke!" Lucas's voice, choked with panic, echoed through the walls. Max, outside, had succeeded. The gap in the doghouse had become a hole, and he dragged himself out, tearing his fur, but feeling no pain. Lucas's scream was the only thing that mattered. With a bark that was more a roar, he ran to the back door of the house, his paws pounding on the lawn, his eyes fixed on Lucas's bedroom window. A dark haze already spread across the glass, and an orange glow pulsed within. The house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a trap. And the Miller family, finally aware of the danger, was about to discover the true extent of the silent fire. The living room window fractured further under Max's relentless attacks. Each impact of his paws, now raw and bleeding, sent a shock through the glass. He felt no pain, only the primal surge of adrenaline fueling his desperation. The image of Lucas, small and terrified, was a burning ember in his mind. A loud crack, like a gunshot, announced his victory. The glass exploded inward, scattering sharp fragments across the floor with a crash. Max, a blur of fur and muscle, launched himself through the jagged opening. The rough edges tore at his flanks, But the sting was a distant whisper against the roaring inferno he now faced. The air inside hit him, a suffocating blanket of smoke, thick and acrid, mingled with an oppressive heat that promised to consume everything. Inside the house, Richard stumbled towards the kitchen, his lungs burning with each shallow breath. The smoke was a living, pulsing entity, a swirling grey wall that blurred his vision and choked his cries. He fumbled through cabinets, his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. The fear of not finding the extinguisher, of failing to save Lucas, was a bitter taste on his tongue. A violent thud, louder than any sound before, echoed from the living room, making the kitchen shelves vibrate. "What was that?" he gasped, his voice hoarse and broken. There was no time to investigate. His sweat-slicked fingers finally closed around the cold, heavy cylinder of the fire extinguisher. He yanked it from its mount with a desperate pull and spun back towards the hallway. Sophia remained frozen in the hallway, a statue of pure panic. Flames danced with increasing ferocity beneath Lucas's door, casting a flickering, ghostly light upon the smoke that enveloped her. The chemical smell of burning plastic and superheated plaster stung her nostrils, making her eyes water. Lucas's cries, now a muffled, terrified lament, pierced her paralysis, but her feet seemed cemented to the floor. She wanted to move, to scream, to tear her son from the fire's grasp, but her body betrayed her. Max, bursting into the living room, wasted no time. The smoke hit him with the force of a physical blow, but his keen senses cut through the haze. He heard Lucas's choked sobs, Sophia's stifled coughs, Richard's strained breathing, a symphony of human despair. The fire roared, a hungry beast devouring the very structure of their home. He darted into the hallway, a dark shadow against the flickering orange glow. His golden eyes, now 2 points of fierce determination, fixed on Lucas's door. Richard reappeared from the kitchen, the heavy extinguisher clutched in his trembling hands. He saw Sophia immobile, and the intensifying inferno consuming the base of Lucas's door. Then a dark shape moved. Max was there, in the heart of the danger, a phantom of unwavering loyalty. For a fleeting second, Richard's mind reeled. The dog he had exiled was now inside, facing the very danger he had been kept from. Max ignored Richard, his gaze locked on the burning door. He let out a furious bark, a guttural command, and began to scratch at the wood with an intensity that seemed to want to tear it to shreds. "Max, what are you doing in here?" Richard yelled, but his voice was swallowed by the aggressive crackle of the flames. He raised the extinguisher, aiming the nozzle at the fire creeping under the door. A hissing jet of white chemical powder blasted against the flames, momentarily smothering them. But the fire was relentless, retreating only to surge back with renewed ferocity, eagerly devouring the charred wood. The heat was now unbearable, radiating in waves. A groan came from the ceiling, small pieces of plaster detaching and falling to the floor with dry snaps. A section of the wall adjacent to Lucas's door began to swell and crack, a reddish, menacing glow pulsing from behind it. Inside the room, Lucas could barely breathe. Dense smoke filled every corner, and the air was thick with suffocating heat. He crawled to the corner farthest from the door, his small body convulsing with desperate coughs, his lungs burning with each forced inhale. The distant hiss of the extinguisher, Max's frantic barks, all were muffled by the monstrous roar of the fire. He felt the floor heating up beneath his bare knees, a silent promise of the agony to come. Radiating from the floorboards beneath Lucas's bare knees, a silent promise of agony. He cowered further into the corner, his small body trembling, trying to escape the suffocating embrace of the smoke. Each shallow breath sent a searing pain through his chest, and his eyes, blurred and watering, struggled to pierce the grey shroud that now consumed his room. A dry crack echoed from above, followed by a shower of plaster dust that stung his face. The ceiling groaned, a desperate lament, as if the very structure of their home was crying for help. In the hallway, Richard emptied the extinguisher, a continuous jet of white powder covering the flames beneath Lucas's door. The fire retreated for an instant, hissing in protest, but soon the orange tendrils twisted and returned, hungrier than before, avidly licking at the blackened wood. The heat was an invisible, scorching wall that made him recoil. Beads of sweat streamed down his forehead, stinging his eyes. With each attempt, frustration and terror deepened in his chest. He saw the smoke swirling, swallowing the contours of the house, and Lucas's desperation was a constant echo in his mind. Max, his flanks torn and body vibrating with urgency, ignored the chemical powder and the heat. His golden eyes were fixed not just on the door, but on the adjacent wall, from where the reddish glow pulsed with alarming intensity. He knew. He knew the enemy wasn't just under the door, but was spreading, insidious and invisible to human eyes, within the walls. He let out a sharp bark, an urgent warning, and then began to strike the wall with his head, his snout and paws scraping furiously against the plaster. A hollow sound responded, and a new crack opened, revealing a stronger glow and a more intense smell of burning. Sophia watched, paralyzed, the drama unfold. Max's frantic barks, Richard's desperate attempts, the flames dancing beneath the door. The sound of Max's head hitting the wall pierced her fog of panic. She saw the dog turn and strike the wall, not the door, and something in her mind connected. The wall. The noise Max made there before, the crack opening. A shriek of terror escaped her lips. "Richard, the wall! Look at the wall!" Her voice was hoarse, barely audible over the fire's roar. Richard turned, the extinguisher now empty and useless in his hands. He saw Max banging his head against the wall, a frenzy of instinct and desperation. His eyes followed the dog's gaze and fixed on the crack. The red-orange glow emanating from the crevice was a sinister omen, far more dangerous than the flames under the door. The smoke, previously a grey spectre, now grew darker, denser, filling the hallway with a suffocating haze. "Max, get out of there!" Richard yelled, but the dog didn't hear him. Or if he did, he ignored him. Max's focus was unshakable. He continued to scratch and strike, trying to open the wall, trying to reach the source of the evil. Lucas's wooden door, already charred and smoking, began to yield under the extreme heat. A loud crack and a prolonged groan echoing through the hallway. Inside the room, Lucas let out a muffled scream. A section of the ceiling above him collapsed with a dull thud, a shower of debris and smoke that made him recoil further into the corner. The heat was unbearable. His clothes felt like they were burning against his skin. He could hear Max's barks, his father's voice, but everything seemed distant, unreal. He coughed, and the taste of soot filled his mouth. The ceiling's groan in the hallway became a deeper, more menacing sound. Small cracks appeared in the plaster above their heads. "The house is coming down!" Sophia shrieked, grabbing Richard's arm. "Lucas! We have to get Lucas out of here!" Panic was now afire in her own heart. Max, sensing the final urgency, abandoned the wall. He couldn't bring it down alone. His eyes turned to the floor. The heat radiating was stronger there under the door, and he could feel Lucas's bedroom floor heating up rapidly. The dog threw himself to the ground, tearing at the hallway carpet with his teeth, revealing the wood underneath. He began to scratch at the wood with renewed fury, his paws bleeding, the sound of claws against wood, a desperate echo in the fire's cacophony. He sought a weak point, a way to dig under the door, a path to his human. Richard, seeing the calculated madness in Max's eyes, understood. The dog was trying to dig. It was insane, impossible, but Richard had no other options. The extinguisher was empty, the door wouldn't budge, and the house was collapsing around them. "Sophia, get out! Call the firefighters now!" he yelled, pushing her towards the front door. He knelt, feeling the heat of the floor. It was infernal. He felt the hallway wall, sensing the fire's vibration, the crackle of flames devouring the internal structure. There was no time. He watched Max, the dog he had doubted, the dog he had punished. Max was his last hope. With a growl of determination, Richard joined Max, using his bare hands to tear away splinters of wood from the floor, feeling the heat burn his skin, but driven by the sole objective of reaching his son. The smell of burning flesh began to hang in the air, not just from the house, but from the desperate effort of father and dog. Richard, adrenaline pulsing through his veins, ignored the searing pain. He hammered at the edges of the hole with his fists, feeling the wood splinter and the flames lick at his hands, his skin burning. Beside him, Max worked with savage fury, his teeth sunk into the wood, the muscles in his shoulders and neck taut. A thunderous crack came from above, and a charred wooden beam collapsed into the hallway. Mere inches from their heads, pulverizing plaster and incandescent sparks. The smell of burnt wood and dense smoke was suffocating. "Lucas!" Richard gasped, his voice hoarse. He needed more space, just a little more. Max, with a grunt of effort, tore off a larger piece of the floorboard, revealing a wider opening. The heat radiating was unbearable, a blast from hell. But the inert form of his son was all Richard could see in his mind. He thrust both arms into the hole, feeling the flames kiss his forearms, burning the exposed skin. His fingers closed around Lucas's leg, and he pulled with all the strength left in his body, a primal scream escaping his throat. Lucas was a dead weight, but with every inch Richard dragged him, hope ignited in his chest. The boy's leg was warm to the touch, but not scorching. There was a sign of life, a small movement, a faint muffled whimper. Max, barking in a rapid, urgent sequence, grabbed Lucas's pants with his teeth, pulling too, joining his strength with Richard's. Together, father and dog, in a desperate symphony of rescue. With a final tug, Lucas's small, limp body slipped through the hole, rolling out of the burning room and onto the hallway floor. Richard pulled him close, dragging him away from the infernal heat. The boy was pale, his face covered in soot, but he was breathing. A faint but real sigh escaped his lips. Richard hugged him tightly, the pain in his hands and arms, forgotten in the face of overwhelming relief. The hallway ceiling groaned again, a deep, rumbling sound. The cracks widened further, and the beam that had fallen earlier began to sway, threatening to give way completely. The fire now roared from inside the adjacent wall, blue and orange flames visible through the newly created crevices. There was no time for anything but escape. "Max, come on! Lucas!" Richard yelled, scooping his son into his arms. The weight was considerable, but he barely felt it. With each step, the floor trembled beneath their feet. Max, with one last look at the burning room, turned and ran ahead, barking to guide them. Outside, Sophia let out a cry of relief and panic as she saw Richard emerge from the front door, stumbling, with Lucas in his arms. Black smoke poured from the house like a volcano. She ran towards them, the phone still in her trembling hand. "Lucas, my son!" she cried, taking the boy from Richard's arms. Max, who had run ahead, stopped beside them, panting, but his golden eyes fixed on Lucas, as if checking his safety. The house's roof collapsed with a deafening crash, flames exploding into the night sky in a terrifying spectacle. A wave of heat hit them, even at a safe distance. Sophia clutched Lucas to her, tears streaming down her face as she hugged her son. Richard, gasping, felt his entire body tremble. He looked at Max, who now sat calmly beside them, watching the burning house. The smoke and heat rising from what had been their home were indescribable. All that remained was a smoking carcass, but they were alive. Lucas was alive. Richard reached out, his palms and fingers raw, and stroked Max's head. The dog leaned into the touch, a small purr in his throat. "You saved us, boy," Richard whispered, his voice choked with emotion and the smoke that still scratched his throat. "You saved us." Max just looked at him, his golden eyes deep and wise. That gaze, previously one of rejection and incomprehension, now held a silent acceptance, a mutual gratitude that transcended words. They had crossed a threshold. The sirens of the fire department and ambulance began to approach, breaking the momentary silence that followed the collapse. The sound, previously desperately awaited, now seemed almost an interruption. The fight was over. The house was lost, but the family was intact, reunited under the night sky, witnessing the end and the new beginning. Max lay down on the cool grass, exhausted but vigilant, his presence an unbreakable bond. Sirens swelled into a cacophony, painting the night with flashing red and blue lights. Fire trucks rumbled to a halt, their powerful engines hissing as crews disembarked, moving with practiced urgency and efficiency. Paramedics followed, their stretchers and equipment gleaming under the intense glare of emergency lights. The air, heavy with the stench of smoke and burnt wood, was suddenly dense with shouted commands and the gush of hoses as firefighters attacked the inferno, consuming what remained of the miller's home. Sophia clutched Lucas to her chest as a paramedic approached, her calm, professional voice contrasting with the surrounding chaos. "Let me see the little boy, ma'am." Sophia hesitated for an instant, fear still etched into her soul, but yielded Lucas to the paramedic's gentle arms. The woman quickly examined Lucas, her small flashlight shining into his eyes. "He's disoriented and inhaled a lot of smoke, but his breathing is stable. We need to take him to the hospital for a full evaluation." Each word was a balm to Sophia, who watched color slowly return to her son's pale face. Lucas coughed, a weak sound, and his eyes opened slightly, searching for his parents. Richard knelt beside Sophia, his burned hand trembling as he touched Lucas's hair. Another paramedic approached him. "Your hands, sir, are quite badly injured." Richard barely felt the searing pain. "Is he okay, Lucas?" "He's going to be fine," the paramedic assured him. "We need to take care of those burns." Max, the German shepherd, lay a few feet away observing everything. His golden eyes followed Lucas, then Richard, and finally fixed on the flames licking at what remained of the house. A firefighter, noticing the dog, paused for a moment. "That dog did quite a job, didn't he? We heard on the radio he was the first to alert us." Richard nodded, tears streaming down his soot-stained face. "He saved us. He saved our son." Max, as if understanding, raised his head and let out a small howl, a sound of relief and exhaustion. That public recognition, however brief, was an echo of the acceptance finally blossoming in his own home. As the paramedics took Lucas to the ambulance, Sophia and Richard followed, but their eyes were drawn back to the house. The fire, once a voracious monster, was now under control, transformed into smoking piles of rubble. The structure that had, for so many years, sheltered their lives, their memories, their dreams, was now an open wound in the ground, a brutal reminder of what they had lost. A cold wind blew, carrying with it the soot and a persistent smell of destruction. The reality of being homeless, of having lost everything material, began to sink in, but it was a light burden compared to the relief of having their loved ones safe. Max accompanied them to the ambulance, refusing to be left behind. He lay down beside Lucas's stretcher, his snout resting on the side, a protective shadow. Sophia, seeing the gesture, stroked Max's head. The touch was hesitant, but full of a new tenderness. "Thank you, Max," she whispered, her voice choked. Sophia's gratitude echoed Richard's, and the dog seemed to absorb every word, every touch. Inside the ambulance, Lucas, still groggy, extended a small hand to Max, who licked his fingers delicately. It was a silent pact, a promise of loyalty and love that had been forged in fire. The ambulance pulled away, its sirens now fading towards the hospital. The road ahead would be long and difficult. The rebuilding would not just be of bricks and wood, but of lives and of a new understanding of what truly mattered. The Miller family had been tested, broken, and ultimately reunited by a tragedy that would forever remind them of a dog's courage. Their lives would never be the same, and Max, The dog, who was once a stranger, was now the cornerstone of their uncertain but hopeful future. The ambulance siren, a sharp lament piercing the night, diminished as the vehicle pulled away from the smoking street, carrying with it not just an injured boy, but the heart of a family. Inside the cramped compartment, fluorescent light bathed Lucas in a clinical glow, oxygen hissing softly as he slept, a heavy sleep forced by exhaustion and inhaled smoke. His lips, previously pale, gained a faint pinkish hue. Max, lying on the cool floor, kept his snout resting on the stretcher, his golden eyes fixed on the boy's face. Each shallow breath of Lucas was monitored by the dog, a tireless sentinel. Richard and Sophia sat on folding benches, their hands intertwined, Richard's palms throbbing with the pain of burns, but his mind was entirely on Lucas. The smell of smoke still permeated their clothes and hair, a vivid reminder of the tragedy. "He's stable, but he needed to get out of that smoke," the paramedic said, her voice calm and reassuring. "We'll run some tests, but the worst is over." The words were a balm. Sophia squeezed Richard's hand, tears silently streaming down her face. She leaned over and stroked Max's head. The dog, who had once watched her with an almost palpable anxiety, now tilted his head into the touch, a small purr coming from his throat. There was no more hesitation, only pure and deep gratitude. "Thank you, Max," she repeated, her voice hoarse. "Thank you for saving our son." The ambulance stopped with a gentle jolt at the hospital's emergency entrance. The commotion outside was immediate. Doors opened, voices rose in quick commands, and the smell of antiseptic filled the air. Lucas was quickly transferred to a hospital stretcher, being wheeled inside. Max, with a low whine of protest, tried to follow, but was gently restrained. "Dogs aren't allowed inside," a nurse said, but her voice was soft, without the usual rigid authority. She had noticed Max's service collar, the emblem somewhat singed, and the animal's protective gaze. Richard intervened, his voice choked. He saved our son. He needs to be close." The paramedic quickly explained. "The dog alerted the family to the fire. He's a hero." The nurse hesitated, then nodded. "All right. But he needs to stay calm and close to you. No barking." Max understood. He followed Richard and Sophia down the white corridors, his gaze always fixed on Lucas's stretcher, which disappeared into an emergency room. The waiting room felt like purgatory, a place of tense silence and cold lights. Richard and Sophia were taken to a small room for their burns to be treated. The pain in Richard's hands was excruciating now that the adrenaline had subsided, but he barely cared. A doctor with tired but kind eyes came to them after a while. "Lucas is stable. He inhaled a considerable amount of smoke, but his lungs seem to be recovering well. He'll need oxygen for a few hours and will be under observation for at least one night, but he's going to be fine." A collective sigh of relief escaped Richard and Sophia's lips. The news was the sweetest melody they could have heard. Max, sitting at their feet, let out a small puff of air, as if he too understood the relief. As the nurses treated Richard's burns, cleaning the blisters and applying ointments, reality began to sink in. Their house no longer existed. Everything they owned, everything they had built, had been reduced to ashes. "Where are we going to stay?" Sophia asked, her voice choked, looking at the bandages on Richard's hands. "We have nowhere to go." Richard held her bandaged hand. "It doesn't matter. We have each other. We have Lucas. And we have Max." He looked at the German shepherd, who was lying down, but with his eyes fixed on them. "We'll figure it out. We always do." Richard's faith, even in the face of material ruin, was a pillar. Max, feeling the tension ease, stood up and rubbed his snout against Richard's leg, a gentle touch of comfort. It was a gesture of loyalty, a silent promise that no matter how difficult the road, he would be there. "When can we see him?" Sophia asked the doctor, anxious. "Soon. He's still very groggy, but you can go in a few minutes. For now, try to get some rest. You've been through a lot." The wait seemed endless. Every second was filled with the image of the house on fire, of despair, and then of overwhelming relief. Max, lying between them, was a living testament to the miracle. The dog, who had been a stranger, a problem, was now the strongest link in their new and uncertain reality. Finally, the door opened. A smiling nurse waved them in. "You can go in. He's waking up." Sophia's heart pounded. They stood up, Richard with aching hands, but a firm step. Max followed them, his tail wagging gently. As they entered the hospital room, the smell of antiseptic was strong, but the sight of Lucas, awake, though weak, filled the space with a new light. He looked at them, his eyes still heavy, but with a glimmer of recognition. "Dad! Mom!" Lucas whispered, his voice raspy. Sophia rushed to the bed, embracing him with a tenderness that held all the pain and all the love in the world. Richard knelt beside her, his burned hands suspended in the air, fearing to hurt him. Lucas coughed lightly, then his eyes moved to Max, who approached the bed, gently resting his snout on the edge. A faint smile appeared on the boy's lips. "Max," he whispered, his voice full of affection and gratitude. Max licked Lucas's small hand, a gesture that sealed the pact forged in fire. In that moment, in the hospital room, with the outside world in ruins, the Miller family was more united than ever. The rebuilding would be arduous, but they would face it together, one for all, and all for Max. The hospital room door closed softly behind the nurse, leaving the Millers immersed in the small sanctuary of hope that had formed around Lucas. Sophia couldn't stop stroking her son's hair, feeling the faint warmth of his skin, a contrast to the coolness of the air that still carried the smell of smoke. Richard, kneeling, rested his forehead on the edge of the bed, his bandaged hands hanging inert. The physical pain was a distant hum compared to the miracle of having his son alive, breathing. Max, his tail wagging gently, lay beside the bed, his snout resting on the soft blanket. He watched Lucas with silent devotion, his golden eyes conveying an unwavering promise. The boy, with visible effort, reached out to the German shepherd, who licked his hand with the delicacy of a breeze. A faint but genuine smile illuminated Lucas's pale face. "My hero," he whispered, and the voice, though hoarse, echoed like a melody in his parents' hearts. That moment in the sterile room, with the outside world in ruins, was proof that they had won. They had overcome the fire, the smoke, the despair. They had won by a thread, and the thread had 4 paws and a loyal heart. The following hours were filled with Lucas's gradual recovery. He slept and woke, drank water, and with each small improvement, the tension in Sophia and Richard's shoulders lessened. Max didn't stray, a faithful and comforting shadow. He even purred softly when Sophia stroked him, a sound that would have been unthinkable before. Max's acceptance was no longer a question. It was a fait accompli, forged in the embers of tragedy. In the morning, a smiling doctor informed them that Lucas was well enough to be discharged, though he would need absolute rest and follow-up care. The air in the hospital seemed to lighten, but with joy came the cold, hard reality. "Where will we stay?" Sophia asked, her voice choked, as they helped Lucas dress in the few clothes the firefighters had managed to salvage. They smelled of smoke and hope. Richard held Sophia's hand, his own still sensitive under the bandages. "I don't know, my love, but we'll figure it out. We always do." His faith was a beacon in the darkness. They hugged, Lucas between them, and Max squeezed into the middle, a knot of fur and loyalty. As they left the hospital, the morning sun seemed strangely bright. The world outside continued to turn, oblivious to the devastation in their lives. There was no home to return to. The house, once a safe haven, was now a charred stain in their thoughts. A family friend, alerted by news of the fire, offered a small vacant apartment he owned. It was a temporary solution, but at that moment, it was a safe harbor. The drive to the apartment was silent. Lucas, exhausted, slept in Sophia's lap, while Richard drove the rented car, his bandaged hands gripping the steering wheel. Max was in the back seat, his head resting on Lucas's shoulder, like a silent guardian. The smell of smoke still followed them, a persistent reminder of the inferno they had escaped. Upon arrival, the apartment was simple, but clean and welcoming. It was an unfamiliar space, devoid of the memories and objects that made up the tapestry of their lives. There were no photos on the wall, no toys scattered on the floor, or the familiar smell of Sophia cooking. It was an emptiness that screamed of loss. Lucas was laid on a makeshift bed, and Max nestled beside him. Sophia sat on the edge of the bed, watching her son and the dog. Tears began to stream, not from sadness, but from overwhelming exhaustion and the sudden comprehension of what they had lost. It was the house, the photos, the family albums, the birthday presents, the memories of a lifetime. Richard sat beside her, embracing her with one arm. "It's so much," she whispered, her voice choked. "Everything is gone." He kissed her forehead. "Not everything. We have each other. We have Lucas, and we have Max." He looked at the German shepherd, who raised his head and licked Sophia's bandaged hand, as if understanding the depth of her suffering. The gentle touch was a reminder that, though the house was ashes, the warmth of their love and loyalty remained. In that borrowed apartment, with the residual smell of smoke still on their clothes, the Miller family began to rebuild. Not with bricks and wood, but with the unbreakable strength of their bond and the constant presence of a dog who had transformed from stranger to savior, from problem to pillar. The road would be long and painful, but they would face it together, every step, every challenge, united by a bond forged in fire and a love that not even the most voracious flames could consume. Max, lying between them, was the living promise of a future, uncertain, yes, but full of hope and unconditional loyalty. The bond that united them was the only thing that mattered now, as the daylight bathed the borrowed apartment with an unforgiving clarity. Every corner seemed empty, echoing the absence of their own lives. There was no Richard's coffee stain on the living room table, no Lucas's drawings tacked to the refrigerator, much less the vanilla scent Sophia loved to spread through the kitchen. There was only a blank canvas, ready to be filled, but the paint was still far away. Sophia felt the weight of the silence, a quietness that wasn't peace, but rather the absence of the familiar. As Lucas slept soundly, Max laid his head on her lap, a comforting weight that anchored her. The bandages on her hands seemed a constant reminder of the fragility of everything. She closed her eyes, and images of the burning house, the grey smoke, and the panic returned like icy waves. The sound of sirens still resonated in her ears, even though the apartment was now in complete silence. Richard, for his part, tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, but with each phone call to the insurance company, a knot tightened in his stomach. The impersonal voice of the agent, the cold questions about lost items and estimated value were a shock against the reality of their loss. One couldn't put a price on wedding photographs, on Lucas's first steps recorded on video, or on Sophia's favorite doll that had been with her since childhood. They were fragments of a soul, not just material possessions. He hung up the phone with a heavy sigh, feeling frustration bubble up. "They want a detailed list," he said, his voice hoarse, looking at Sophia. "How can we list an entire life?" Sophia merely pressed her lips together, the tears that had previously run dry now threatening to return. "I don't know, Richard. I don't even know where to start." Max, sensing their anguish, stood up and rubbed his snout against Richard's hand, then Sophia's. A low murmur escaped his throat. a sound that was part lament, part comfort. He understood somehow the depth of what they had lost, not just physically, but emotionally. Over the following days, the solidarity of friends and the community continued to be a balm. Bags of new clothes, food, and even some toys for Lucas arrived. Each gesture of kindness was proof that they weren't alone. But it also highlighted the void they needed to fill. Lucas, despite his physical recovery, missed his room, his own toys, the familiar smell of his home. He clung to Max, the only piece of his old life that remained unchanged, and the dog responded with infinite patience, allowing the boy to hug him and nestle into his fur. One afternoon, as Sophia tried to arrange the donated clothes in an unfamiliar closet, she found a small box. Inside, a teddy bear, one of the few items that had been miraculously rescued from Lucas's room, intact, though with a faint smell of smoke. It was the teddy bear Richard had given Lucas for his first Christmas. Seeing it, Sophia broke down. The teddy bear, a symbol of innocence and happy memories, triggered a wave of overwhelming grief. She hugged it, tears wetting the soft plush, and a deep sob escaped her chest. Richard rushed to her, embracing her tightly. "It's okay, my love. Let it out." Max, who had been lying at Lucas's feet, stood up and came to Sophia, licking her tears with unwavering tenderness. It was as if he was saying, "I'm here, no matter what happens." In that moment, amidst the pain and uncertainty, Sophia felt a small flame of hope. It wasn't about what was lost, but about what had remained. They had each other, they had Lucas, and they had Max. What they had lost was a house, but it wasn't their home. Home was the warmth between them, Max's silent promise, Lucas's faint laughter that, little by little, began to echo again. The search for a new beginning was imminent. Richard began looking for houses to rent, but the idea of a new home felt strange and distant. How could they build new memories over the ashes of old ones? The Miller family knew the journey would be long, marked by invisible scars and the persistence of a smoky smell that was no longer physical, but an olfactory memory. But, with Max by their side, the unwavering loyalty in his golden eyes was the promise that, in the end, they would find their way back home, no matter where it was. The search for a new home was more than a mere real estate transaction. It was a quest for refuge, a place where memories could blossom again, free from the phantom scent of smoke. Richard and Sophia visited dozens of houses, each one a subtle reminder of what they had lost. Some were too large, empty of warmth. Others too small, suffocating. None resonated with the promise of a new beginning. Max always accompanied them. While Richard and Sophia assessed the condition of the walls and the size of the yards, Max sniffed the floors, the corners, with a seriousness that seemed to go beyond canine curiosity. He was looking for something they couldn't see, something perhaps only he could feel, the essence of a place that could be safe. Lucas, though more animated than in the first weeks after the fire, still showed signs of the experience. He clung to Max with a touching intensity, and the dog responded with infinite patience, his large body offering a safe harbor for the boy. Max's presence was the only constant in a world that had been turned upside down. One sunny afternoon, Richard found an online listing, a modest house on the outskirts of town with a fenced yard and some old oak trees. It wasn't their dream house, but something in the description called to him. "Let's go take a look," he suggested to Sophia without much conviction. Upon arrival, the house felt more like a refuge than a mere residence. The walls were a soft cream, and a small porch extended across the front. It lacked the grandeur of their previous house or the specific details of their old home. But there was a welcoming simplicity. Max, for the first time in months, didn't sniff with suspicion. He walked around the yard, smelling the freshly cut grass, and then lay down in the shade of one of the oak trees, watching them with his golden eyes. Inside, the house was compact but well lit. The wooden floorboards creaked softly beneath their feet, a sound that, strangely, brought a sense of familiarity. There was a fireplace in the living room, a detail that made Richard smile. "We can have cozy nights here," he murmured, imagining the fire crackling. Sophia walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the yard where Max lay. There was no smoky aroma here, only the sweet scent of earth and wildflowers. She could see Lucas running, laughing as Max followed him, wagging his tail. In that moment, she felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. The house wasn't perfect, but it was different. It didn't carry the weight of lost memories, but the promise of those yet to be created. "What do you think, Max?" she asked softly, as if the dog could answer. Max raised his head, his ears perked, and let out a soft bark, almost a murmur of approval. Richard approached, wrapping her in a hug. "I think he likes it," he said, his smile genuine. "And you?" Sophia turned to him, her eyes moist, but this time not from sadness. I think so. I think we can be happy here." The decision was made. In the following days, the Miller family began to fill their new house with the few belongings they had managed to salvage, and with the many gifts from friends and family. The temporary apartment, once a refuge, now felt like a cocoon they were ready to leave. The first night in the new house was strange and wonderful. Boxes were still piled in the corners, but there was a sense of belonging. Lucas slept in his new room, a smile on his face, while Max nestled at the foot of his bed, a silent guardian. Richard and Sophia sat in the living room, fire dancing in the fireplace, its warm light filling the space. A comfortable silence hung in the air, different from the oppressive silence of the temporary apartment. It was a silence full of promises. "Look at him," Sophia whispered, pointing to Max, who now slept deeply beside the fireplace, his body relaxed. "He brought us here." Richard kissed Sophia's forehead. "He saved us, and he taught us what truly matters." The house still didn't have Sophia's vanilla scent, nor Richard's coffee stain, nor Lucas's drawings on the refrigerator, but it had something more important. The warmth of a family that, though marked by ordeal, had emerged stronger, more united. The rebuilding was not just of walls and objects, but of souls. Max, the dog who was once an unwanted stranger, was now the anchor of their joy, the heart that beat in sync with theirs. His past of rejection had been consumed by the same flames that threatened the family, and from the ashes had blossomed an unwavering loyalty, living proof that true love doesn't choose form, but the heart. The Miller family had found their way back home, not a home of concrete and wood, but a home built on the unbreakable foundation of love, resilience, and the loyalty of a German shepherd who refused to give up on them. It was a new beginning, a new home, and the promise that, together, they could face any fire.